So we just heard a clip from a new documentary called PTSD 911, which focuses on the stress and long-term trauma experienced by 911 dispatchers and police officers. And it's really hard to think of the mental multitasking involved with taking these calls, remaining calm, getting the most important information when people are really in a bad state when they're calling, and making very, very quick, very high stakes decisions. And I'm wondering, do we all spend enough time thinking about the emotional toll that it takes on the first responders, from the 911 dispatcher, EMS, and police officers who go through these intense communications to get a person from that very first call to get them the help they need, from the first responder and the people who arrive on the scene? So I wanted to explore this topic a little bit more in depth, and I invited two very, very special, unique guests today who represent both sides of the call. First, the 911 dispatcher, and then the police officer and paramedic who arrive on the scene. But most importantly, our two guests today, they aim to seek out ways to support first responders at the moment of crisis when they get those calls, along with the lingering effects. So, and if there aren't opportunities, they have actually created them. So I'm just so glad today that we have these two people. Ricardo Martinez, the second, is a storyteller, author, and the host and creator of the Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. It's a podcast based on the experience of being a dispatcher. Ricardo started the I Am 911 multi-platform movement that is now spread from all of the United States to Canada and now to the UK. And the whole goal is to open the eyes to millions of people of what that experience of being a dispatcher is truly like. And Lieutenant Mark Panjwani. Mark is a lieutenant serving with the Beverly Police Department in Massachusetts, where he also serves as the department's medical director, most recently spearheading the brand new Health and Wellness Unit. Mark is also an FBI National Academy graduate with a special emphasis on health and wellness and holds an MA in criminal justice. Mark's long experience as a paramedic also gives him additional insights on many levels of this conversation today. So welcome, Mark. Welcome, Ricardo. It's so great to have you here. And we always begin by asking our guests to describe a bend in the road, an experience that altered the path of where they thought they were going. So I'm going to ask our guests to maybe weave in their work with this first answer about the bend in the road. So Ricardo, Mark, welcome. And Ricardo, can you get us started by telling us about one of your bends?
Of course. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today to talk about this. And we'll go back in time to about 2001, and I think a lot of us in any point in time in our lives, we hit a version of rock bottom. And it was during that time that I was trying to figure out life. I was about 19 years old, and although young, I was already thinking about the future. And where I was at the time, it just really wasn't working out. I'll just put it that way. It just really wasn't working out. So I needed to figure out the next step for myself. What am I going to do with life? I wanted to go to Florida to visit my mom, my grandmother, and my younger twin sisters to just simply see if there was a way that I could get refreshed and figure out what path I was going to go on. Because that version of rock bottom, I wanted to find my way back up. So I find my way going to Florida. And I don't know about you or anyone else who is listening, but I feel like sometimes there's music that we listen to that we can connect with. And maybe sometimes you just think, I needed to hear that. I really needed to hear that. And you really hear and understand those lyrics. And a band called POD, the song is called Alive, played on the radio. And those first few lyrics just really reached out to me. And I thought, I don't know where I'm going to go in life right now on my way to Florida, but something just feels right. Like there was a reason that I heard this song. And I did feel alive in that moment. I get to Florida and I'm with my family. My 2 week stay that I had originally planned on ended up turning into 4 years, about 4 years. But that first month, as I had my time there, my mom ends up coming into the room and she goes, you think you might want to find a job? And I thought, oh yeah, maybe I should, because obviously I'd overstayed, not maybe overstayed my welcome, but she says, it doesn't sound like or seem like you're going to be leaving anytime soon. So maybe you should look for a job. And I thought, you know what, maybe I should. And at that time, I only had retail management under my belt. One of those places was a Blockbuster Video. And no, I'm not the reason why Blockbuster Video no longer exists. But that's what I had in my background. So that's what I was looking for. Now, this is Polk County, Florida. And a lot of times, if you're on social media or the internet, whichever, and you see the hashtag Florida man or Florida woman stories, it's usually out of that county. And so I'm looking all over the place for somewhere to work, retail management style, and I can't find anything. And one day my mom says to me, you know, your cousin's husband was having lunch with the chief of police recently. And because it's a small town, this town is Frostproof, Florida. And yes, it's a real name, it's a real town, it's a small town, but Frostproof, Florida, that's where I started.
Huh.
Everyone knows the chief knows everyone. So they were having lunch, and I guess the chief told him that they were hiring dispatchers. And my mom said, you should try it. And I thought, I have no experience. I have no idea what 911 does other than answer the phone. I don't know. The only experience I had really was a TV show that I loved growing up with William Shatner as the host, and it was Rescue 911.
Yeah.
That was my favorite show. So I thought, okay, I'll try. I ended up applying, and I go in to kind of a grueling interview, and I don't hear anything for about 2 months because at the end, the chief of police and the lieutenant, they say to me, you'll hear from us, which that is almost the equivalent of if you remember asking your parents for something as a kid and they say, we'll see.
Oh
It
yeah, we know
means,
that one.
yeah, it means no, right? So I was I was thinking, I guess I didn't make it because it's 2 months now. And I'm still trying to claw my way up from my version of rock bottom. And one day I'm dozing off on the couch and I end up deciding to go to the room that I was staying in there at my mom's house to take a nap. And my grandmother, who only really spoke Spanish, kicks in the door and starts yelling at me, Los policías están aquí. ¿Qué hiciste? And she's like, the police are here. What did you do? And and I thought, I don't think I did anything. I was out with my cousins last night, but I don't think I did anything. So she tells me to go out there to figure out what's going on, and it's the chief. And I say hello. I said, what's going on? And he goes, well, I just wanted to see if you still wanted the job. And I said, well, yes, of course, but I haven't heard from you in 2 months. And he goes, look, we like you. You made it, but our background process just takes forever. And a lot of times when you're starting a new job, it's, you're going to start next week. Well, he ends up telling me, you're starting tonight, which I was shocked right away. He goes, you're going to work the midnight shift from 10 p to 6 a. And he leaves. I go back inside. I tell my grandmother, and she goes, well, you should probably go take a nap then. And and I was she's laughing at me. I go to take the nap, but that night I go in and I meet my trainer. And all I can say was that he was a very seasoned trainer, a seasoned dispatcher, maybe slightly crusty, but he was awesome. He was an excellent person. And but it's about 25, 30 minutes that I'm in there seeing everything. 911 goes off and he answers. And when he's done with the call, I applaud him. And I said, well done. That was awesome. And he goes, thanks. We don't get a lot of applause, but thanks. He goes, you're next. And I said, excuse me? And he goes, you're next. And I said, sir, I've only been here about 25, 30 minutes. Is there no other training?
Or no
And he,
other script, an
oh,
actual
right.
script.
Yeah. Is there nothing else? And he goes, listen, the only way you're going to learn how to do this is by doing it on the job. You learn as you go along. Plus, there are three things that you need in order to do this and to be in this profession. And I said, what's that? And he says, one, you need common sense. Two, you have to have thick skin. And this third one that has always stuck with me and has really been the main piece of everything that I do for a living now, the third thing that he said is, you have to be human.
Mm.
And that is how I got into it, and that was that has been the main piece of everything that I do, because how many times do you hear that from someone say you got to be human? And it really struck a chord. And it struck a chord more so when I was done with my training. That last day that I was, or the first day rather, that I was going to be on my own, the chief of police ends up saying to me, do you think you have this? And I said, don't worry, I've got it. Besides, you listen to the scanner all the time. You live 5 minutes down the road. And if you hear me having any issues, I know you're going to be here. And he says,
Uh-huh.
okay, you know me. So we're talking, right? And this small PD, people could come in and make complaints right there. Well, a car pulls up, screeches up, and immediately we're at attention. And a lady runs in yelling, I found him. I found him. And the chief kind of grabs under her arms a little bit to stabilize her, because everybody knew the chief. The chief knew everyone. And he says, what happened? Basically, what happened was she was separated from her husband, and they were trying to decide whether they were going to continue their marriage. And she decided, yes, I want to. So she goes to the house, but she found that he had hung himself. Now, I'm thinking my first major call is going to be on the phone, because I'm there answering calls, but this is face to face. I had not been, I wasn't prepared for this in that sense of it being face to face, And so she's sitting in the lobby. The chief of police goes to where this happened, which was literally across the street, diagonal from the police department. And then the other officer who was out there on patrol was there as well. Everyone was out there. She's in the lobby, which is really just across the glass from me. And what do? You be human, right? So I go and I sit with her and I ask her, is there anyone that you would like for me to call for you? And she said, yes, family.
Hmm.
So I called them. They're sitting there with her, and I'm already trying to process all of this because it's 2001. No one is talking about mental health and wellness. No one is talking about resilience. There's not resources out there, maybe for the officers, but not for dispatch, because at that time it was just suck it up. You take
Right.
the call, you go to the next one, and you kind of figure out what to do after that. And there was nothing else. So when the officers come back, and she had already left with family, when they come back, I'm still trying to process this. The officer had the note, the suicide note, and I'm standing there. Now, one of the things the dispatchers don't usually get is closure. I knew what happened, right? I knew that. But for the whatever reason, it was bothering me. And I kept trying to look at the note. And the officer says, do you want to read it? And I said, I can't explain it, but I feel like I need to. And he goes, I understand. I understand. So he gave it to me. And I'll just say really quick that basically all it said was he wished that they could have made it happen because he couldn't live without her or their kids. And every time I tell the story, I always think, because I don't know how the time limit was from when he did what he did to when he was found, but all I could think was, if you could have waited just a little bit longer, I wouldn't be sharing this story with you right now.
Oh gosh.
But that's
What a
my
what a
beginning.
That's your beginning. Oh my gosh. Mark, welcome. And I should also say Mark is my beloved brother. So it's always great when you have people in your family who are your
Right.
most admired people professionally and personally. So glad you're here. So Mark, tell us about how your bend and how you first got interested in this field.
Sure. Well, also, thanks a lot for having me. I mentioned I've never called my sister Roberta, so if I slip and say bird,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
apologize
I think
to you and your viewers.
that's the first time
Um,
I've ever heard you say it out loud to me.
yeah, it may be the last time,
Yeah.
thanks again for having me. And Ricardo, it's so nice to meet you. And
You
looking
as well.
forward to this conversation. So I've listened to your podcasts, several of them, almost all of them, and I was thinking, I don't really have a dramatic bend in the road. How am I going to pull this off? But the more I was thinking, we all have bends that get us from here to there, and where we're and where we're going, and I think I'm no different. So I thought of I have one kind of a specific example, and then one more of a vague kind of evolving feeling that got to where I am in my career, to my careers. But one I remember when I was very young. I'm going to say maybe 7 years old. I remember being out with my mother, in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and we just saw on the opposite sidewalk a man had collapsed, and my mom, who's a nurse, ran over. There was another, I assume, was a nurse helping him, and one was doing CPR, and my mom was helping, and someone else came, and that image to this day sticks with me. How complete strangers, arrived at this man's side, not knowing him or anything about him, and they did their best to revive him. I have no idea what the outcome was, but that memory really stuck with me. Really stuck with me. I was just fascinated by that, and eventually, first responders. Ricardo, you were mentioning the TV show Rescue 911, which I enjoyed too, but I'll go back a little further in
I know what you're
time.
going to say.
Yeah, my favorite show was called Emergency. So, that came out in the early to mid 70s, and I watched it, in the late 70s, probably when it was came out in reruns, and just fascinated by Johnny and Roy, and all the crazy things they did, and especially all the paramedicine, and all that piece of it. So that really got my interest in emergency medicine and first responders in general. And then just kind of going forward towards college, I always kind of assumed in high school and college that I would, I was on a pre-med, go to medical school track. I was taking all the courses. Our father was a medical doctor. So I just assumed I would kind of carry on the family legacy, if you will. I think our father's father was a doctor, and his father's father, and I don't know how far back it goes, Bert, but Roberta, sorry. But so that also, and I never felt pressured to do that, but I thought, well, this is probably what I'm going to end up doing, But then, talking, I became an EMT my freshman year in college and started to work right away. And as a very young EMT, experiencing things that were eye-opening for sure. Definitely not equipped mentally or emotionally to see things as such a young person. But I also really, really enjoyed that work. But then, speaking with friends, and it was kind of like law enforcement kept coming back to me. I don't know why. I was very, very interested in law enforcement and how it all works in the court system, and the legal system. It's just all, but I initially just didn't kind of let it, I never took it too serious. But fast forwarding a little bit further, after college, I got a job as an EMT working full time. Eventually, I was accepted into medical school. But I just didn't, I wanted to be I wanted to be working on the streets in the field. And ultimately, that's kind of where I ended up. I never felt any pressure, from the family. I think it took them a while to accept, especially the law enforcement job. I kind of kept that a secret until I got hired and had to go to an academy. I'm like, well, guess what? And I think, my parents' mother especially was more concerned about the safety aspects of, being in law enforcement. But obviously she became, both my parents and my family all became my number one supporters, great source of encouragement. So that's kind of my little bend to see, and fast forward all these years, I'm still at it and still enjoying it for the most part.
That's so, it all makes sense because like Mark said, like you didn't know that growing up. Like I know you were always interested in, emergency work and paramedics, but the minute you started this work, and remember Mark's oldest child was born right at the academy graduation. Like
Yes.
your baby Savannah was like literally there you are in all your uniform, and you're holding your baby, and it was just remarkable, and it just clicked and it all made sense. So yes, I think the concern just for safety, of course, but um, when
Yeah, and I will say that that baby now is
yeah,
25 and about to have her own baby
yes,
next month. So
and
my
a
little
nurse,
my family
right?
clip, and yes, she went to
Yeah.
nursing school and she's a nurse as well. So
Yeah, it's
um,
wonderful. It just makes sense, So that's another thing when we all follow our bends. You're often doing things that surprise you or your family or whoever you think you might need to impress or something. But when you're in your wheelhouse, everything just happens naturally, as it did for both of you. I love that story. So I wanted to. I'm going to play a quick clip from one of the Within the Trenches episode, and when you listen, Mark, I'm glad you got a chance to listen to some episodes. Ricardo, you have such a natural way with all of your colleagues, and you have I think you have like a saying like, "Your worst day is our everyday." Is that the sort of tagline? And it's really
Yes.
true, So in this one clip, I'm going to play. It's a young dispatcher named Sydney, and she's just talking. She was like all bright eyed and so optimistic, and then kind of like your first day, it just like it's so shocking. You don't get a lot of training, and then she was saying like for a dispatcher, I think you're in a room by yourself and you're not talking about things afterwards. A lot of people go out for drinks or hanging out after work, but you're kind of, I didn't realize how solo this was, the dispatcher experience. So anyway, tell us a little bit about that and just how like you really address the humanity in addition to all of the logistics of what you have to do all at the same time.
Yeah, of course. So, I think a lot of us kind of, and Mark, you can probably attest to this as well. More of the old school, I can consider myself old school dispatch, law enforcement, public safety. A lot of times after some hard shifts, it would be what's known as choir practice, where as I see Mark chuckle there, people would say choir practice. And I remember when I first started, I didn't know what that was. And they said, we go to the bar and we have a couple drinks or something. I was like, oh, okay. and and you talk things out, or maybe you don't. You just, hang out or whichever. But, with Sydney, she talks about starting out and being a baby dispatcher, but there's a lot of times where in the beginning, yeah, you're by yourself. And I mean, you're with your trainer, right? But there's this thin line of whether you want folks to just talk with everyone in the room or you don't want that influence. So you're just there. But then, depending on how people came up as well, you might have some who have been there that are more seasoned 911 professionals that they're coming up into 911 was more so, I'm not going to learn your name until you've gone through it, until you're officially here, which is horrible because you want people to stay. But also I feel like that's that guard. That's the way that guard was coming up. And it just continued to roll that way. Or one of the sayings, a saying that I despise is that's the way it's always been done. And nothing progresses. It stifles innovation and again, progression of whatever you're trying to do, especially when you're trying to build a culture at your center or at a sheriff's office, police department, whatever, fire, EMS, all the same. It's so when you're starting out, it can be lonely, especially if people aren't talking about it, because what I found out, especially when I left from being at the one-seater small PD where it was me by myself for 8 hours. And let me tell you, when it went to heck, it definitely went to heck. Like it was just me there and I'm freaking out, basically pulling my hair out, trying to keep up and do what I have to do. But when I moved back home to Southwest Michigan and I'm working in the county that I grew up in, now I'm with a team, but at that same time, walking in, it's a whole different dynamic of trying to work with other people that have different habits, different ways they do things, and it can be lonely because you feel like you're alone. And there's that fear, which I know since probably about 2016 on, we've all been in a way who are doing this work with mental health and wellness, have been trying to squash that stigma. But there was that fear early on where if I ask for help or if I share a story or if I open up with what's bothering me, people are going to think that I'm weak and that I can't handle it. So you start bottling it up, you hold it in, and you think that you're putting it on the shelf and leaving it at work, but it's not true. That's BS because when you get home, then you're kind of distant and you don't realize it at the time because nobody wants to look in the mirror to
Right.
say that is it me? You
Mhm.
know, is it possible that there's something wrong with me? And I was the same way. I'll admit it. I was the same way. I didn't want to admit that, but I I had to start working on me. So when I was having that conversation with Sydney, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, loving it, and still is loving it and everything, right? But there are those moments where you feel like you're the only one. You feel like there's nothing else that is going on and there's all these different challenges, but when people aren't talking about it,
Mhm.
what do you do?
Right, right. And trauma lives in the body, right?
Hmm.
You just need to process that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the trauma in the body and the amount of things that stress does that you don't even realize, if you could have, and this is just, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I'm just speaking from my own experience. I started having like stomach issues and stuff. And I remember speaking with someone on an episode, and they were talking about secondary trauma and how that can cause those stomach issues or other things. And I thought, are you kidding me? Like stress can do that much, and it definitely can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, and Mark, you've made a comment before that connects directly to what Ricardo just expressed. That you said years ago, we continually care and respond to the needs of others. All right, that's the nature of your work, but rarely do we take care of our own. As administrators, we all need to do much better. So I know you're working with your department and your superiors and the chief and the higher levels on it, a town and state level. Um, so you became medical director of your department, which makes sense with your background. That's wonderful. And I wanted to ask how it was when you first initiated the idea of heading up the health and wellness movement, and the response to that. Has it been a little challenging to get people to buy in? And then I want to weave in this conversation. Mark and his department hosted a screening, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, of a new documentary called PTSD 911. And Ricardo actually knows some folks that are featured. So, Mark, if you would just describe your work with the unit, and then we'll segue right into talking about the film. And I'm gonna play the clip I played at the beginning of the podcast is from that documentary. So, yeah. So tell us about that, Mark.
Yeah, sure. I'll just kind of real quick go back in time and 35 years at the start of my career where Ricardo just mentioned we didn't do anything really to help each other cope, if you will. Because calls, you have obviously the dramatic, horrible calls, but then you have the more routine calls. But there's nothing routine about these calls either. They're the nasty domestics or the very difficult, drunk people or think these aren't normal circumstances to be in for your average person, but for someone in law enforcement or EMS or someone answering the phones, these are very it's a normal occasion, but for us, so you get used to it. But after over time, I remember years ago cleaning the back of my ambulance. It was just covered in, not to be graphic, but just covered in nastiness. I'm on my hands and knees just getting ready, and then we were in a busy 911 system, and you know the tones go off. You're not even ready, mentally, let alone, physically, and, off you go again. And then, off you go again. And, by the time your 24-hour, 48-hour shift is over, you try to come home and deal with all that. And the same with law enforcement, you deal with the difficult calls, and we realized, that we're not Superman, we're not Wonder Woman, we're not, we're just, Ricardo mentioned humanity. We're just people. This just happens to be our job and our skill set. So that's kind of where, where we've come, and it to seem like it may seem like a weakness, like we're supposed to just brush it off, when you have a difficult call or you're not coping well with something, and have no idea what, critical stress is. You think, oh, I'm weak, I can't handle this, and you try to keep moving on, and finally you get to a point where you just can't, or you're doing your job very poorly, and you're not a benefit to your community or your coworkers or your, especially your family when you get home. So gradually we finally come to a point now where we're realizing, that first responders, deal with stress, and they need to know, how to really handle it, and recognize when things are getting out of control. And everyone's a little bit different. There was a book. There's a very famous within law enforcement, a book written by Gil Martin. The name's escaping me right now, but the way he explained, stress, when an officer comes home after a shift, they just want to sit on the couch and, just forget about everything and not make decisions, and drink, and just not be with their family. They just want to be left alone, because when they're at work, they're constantly making decisions. They're at a stress level, even when you're at work, you're at a stress level here, as opposed to being down here like most people. And then all of a sudden you get a call or you have to respond, and you're up here, and then it takes, you clear the call and you come back down, and then up and down and up and down. And then finally, when you get home, you're not down. And, and it takes hours, to come back down. And then guess what? You go back to work. So that kind of explains, why we need to recognize and deal with, with our stress and our mental health. And so and I'm not, reinventing anything here. This is work that's been done in other departments all over the country and all over the world. And, in our particular case, we're just incorporating, more organizing a plan. So we do have a health and wellness initiative at our department. And you asked I was a little bit worried how our department members, were going to respond to some of the things we want to do. And, we put out surveys and talked informally, and we've gotten great support from it. I think, especially the younger generation, which is just about everyone to me now. They're definitely on board. They're interested. They want help. There's, I can tell you initially, for the past many years, we developed something called critical incident stress, response. So when you have a difficult, especially a very difficult call, I'm sure, Ricardo, you probably sat in on these, meetings, but we'll, like I can recall, the first time I went through it, because I was a little skeptical. I'm like, well, I don't need that. I'm fine. I can handle this. But years ago on a call where I went to a suicide, and it was actually, an off-duty officer from my department, the last thing I want to deal with, but you had to deal with the family who was on scene, and being there for a few hours, helping and dealing with it. And finally you realize when you clear the call, you're kind of a mess inside. And that was the first time. Our administrators they're great. They're like, you shall, not can you, it's you shall, when you get back to the station, go upstairs, and there was a team, mostly our peers, meaning from other departments, that, sign up to to be on this team. And, it's the initial part's just, you call it a diffusing. And,
Right.
we went around the room and they're like, hey, what did you see? Literally, or what did the call come in as? What did you see? What did you do? And you get it all out, and by the time I was done and got home, I was like, oh, wow, I felt better.
That's such a poignant way of describing that, because
Yeah.
I'm sure often you want to just make it go away. You have so many calls, that's a especially tragic one, but you don't want to keep processing because it's just too much, when you get home after that long day. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we're looking forward now to a lot of other more initiatives to really help with the mental well-being of our staff. We've included, Ricardo, we have civilian dispatch in our department. They're very much included in everything we do because we know the stress they deal with is often, it's unrecognized and or unsupported, but so they're part of it. We have peer support is huge. We have a chaplain that we're going to get on board. We're very interested in mandating mental health checkups, just like a doctor checkup for your physical health. We will have a clinician, set it up so it's easy. And, if you want to talk about sports, they can talk about sports. But if they want to really get something off their chest, they'll have that opportunity, to talk it over. And I think they'd be surprised, how much that could help as well.
That's great.
If I could jump in just really quick, I just want to say thank you. I love that you all do that, because when I think I went to one debriefing, because up until that point, no one ever invited dispatch. And there are some agencies out there still where dispatch is left out. And that one that I went to, here was the crazy thing. The one that I went to, when we were the ones who started, they said, let's just have dispatch go ahead and tell us their side. How did this go down? And we told them. And one of the fire chiefs immediately jumps in and he says, why have you not been here before? We need to know this. Like, we didn't know that. We didn't know that you go through this. And we basically said, we've never been invited until this one.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it has changed since then, so thank you, Mark, and your department and everything, because that's amazing.
That's great.
Yeah. And I would say as well, even in our system, we have private EMS, and they're like the lost child in all of this. They're not, they don't get a lot of support from, their management, and they don't get included in a lot of, and they're at all the, think of all the worst of the worst. They're at everything, right by our sides.
Right. That's so true. There are so many different stages, especially with the big calls, right? From the dispatch call all the way through. And I know, like, the police officers, you are the public facing, right? Everyone, when I walk around Beverly with Mark, like, everybody knows you and you know everybody. There's just that presence for all of these years. But all of the people that you're interacting with and training, it's pretty remarkable. Tell us about this. So you had a community screening of this documentary, and I watched it. It was shocking. It was absolutely uplifting in many ways. I was so impressed with these people, like the dispatchers and the officers, and how raw and authentic they were about their experiences. So I just have such admiration for them. So I'd love you both to talk about that. And Mark, you had a panel discussion following, and I know you both know people from this film. Just share a few comments about that, if you would.
Yeah, we have in our department a community impact unit, and we have a dedicated, a sergeant and some officers and a clinician, as well as substance abuse counselors attached to this unit, and they're kind of like our, superstars of the department. Anything, patrol needs that is really kind of difficult to deal with, we approach them with it, and they handle things really well. So their unit came across this film, and they really worked hard to bring it to Beverly. And so we had a screening about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, at one of the theater in Beverly. It seats about 1,000 people, and it was good. I had that was the first time I had watched a documentary, and it was really, obviously really well done. Having representation, having a professional dispatcher, law enforcement and fire, like you said, for just getting that perspective and the rawness of what they've been through, what they've seen, and the reality of how they didn't get the help they needed. It wasn't recognized. Maybe there just wasn't an organized approach to say, hey, how can we help you? How can we get you back to work? Instead, the big realization was these people were like, I can't lose my job. I have a family. I have to, support them. And when your job is interfering with your, literally your life, your quality of life, the way you function outside of work. So the film really was eye-opening to all of us. And then we had a really good panel discussion afterwards that was moderated by the district attorney from our county. So it was very well received, and we were really happy to bring it to our community.
And you can I was on the website, you can host, like I could host a community screening here and invite our local, and it's great that they're making that so accessible to the community.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. Yeah. Not only for first responders to go watch, but just for the community to have kind of an understanding of what goes on, behind the scenes, if you will.
Right. And Ricardo, you knew the dispatcher, well, one of the dispatchers that was included in the film, Nicole.
Yes. Yeah. Nicole is a friend of mine, and I'll say this coming up to the culmination of what ultimately happened. Just 2020, right before everything closed down for the pandemic, at a conference where it was the first time that they were going to have this critical issues forum for mental health and wellness for 911 professionals, for dispatchers and call takers. Someone reached out to me and said that this person, Nicole, was going to be there and that I really needed to meet her and have her on the show just to share her story. So I had gotten a hold of her, and I met her there, and she shared her story, which was very powerful, impactful. I mean, she was dispatching during the Boston Marathon bombing, and she was telling me about her PTSD journey and what had happened. Now, me thinking that's what caused that wasn't what caused it. It ended up being a um, on the duty shooting that was going on. I mean, she was going to be giving a presentation the next day. I sat with her. I was up front, and she had said, "I wish my family could see this." And I said, "I have enough space on my phone. I will record it for you." And so my arms I still get cramps in my arms from holding my phone for an hour and a half. But it was just so good to hear this story, because here she was talking about her PTSD. She left dispatch for a while, worked on her, came back, and now she was sharing her story, and she was going all over the place. Like I was seeing her at other conferences. All of these things were going on. What I remember though was that, she told me after that episode, she's like, "Don't stop what you're doing. Keep going, because we need this. Like, dispatchers need this. We need our stories to get out there." And I said, I won't stop. So, she's continuing on, and she's doing her thing. Well, what I didn't know was that eventually she ended up having a medical issue, which she ended up being out of dispatch again. And ultimately, she ended up losing her battle with her mental health. And it was at a national conference. I remember just a few years back now, and it was in Nashville. It was that morning of, I think it was either the first or the second day of that conference. And I had expected to see her there potentially. And we all found out, all of us that knew her on social media that morning, that she had passed away, that she had taken her life. And I just thought, are you serious? Are you serious right now? Like, this can't be happening. And so I talk about her when I go out, and I do all of this because I want people to make sure that they know that they're not alone, and that they're not weak for asking for help or anything like that. There's more courage in actually opening up and asking when you're ready, of course, when people are ready. But yeah, Nicole, an amazing person, and her story continues on. especially throughout this documentary and everything.
Like you're continuing to tell her story.
Right.
Right. That's what your mission, right? With your initiative is keep telling the story. Yeah. And Mark,
Yeah.
Nicole's parents were at the screening in Beverly.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
They live in Maine, and they came down, and they were very gracious and informally answered some questions afterwards after the panel discussion. But yeah, it's really big of them, and I know it's not easy for them, to sit through and watch that. But I think they've made it part of their mission to really let her legacy live on.
Because you're not just the way the film is constructed. You're not expecting that. And then like the closing slides, is telling what the 3 or 4 people are doing today. And then it just gave her dates. And it was a shock because there was no explanation. You just kind of thought the worst. And then I was, you're worried about everybody featured in the film. But I really believe both of you tell a good story. You just explain things so well. But when you have these actual faces and specifics, that's what like we lay people and people in general, I think, remember through story and through sharing these accounts. So I just think that's through film and what both of you are doing with your initiatives. It's powerful. So I want to add a little comic relief in all of this. Ricardo, I was listening to one of your podcasts that just came out on October 8th, 6/23, I think. And you were at a conference, and this dispatcher from Austin, Texas, I think, and you were chit-chatting, and she was, it was such a great conversation, and she was telling like a lot of really interesting things, but she kind of included this one story. This older woman just called and, well, you tell the story. It's very funny. It involves an older woman and a shovel.
Right. Yeah. So I believe my guess was Mandy, and out of Texas, and she's telling me this story where there was a lady who called because I think it might have been a gopher or of some sort, and because I don't think they were really sure but she had called because she was having an issue with it. The dog was out there barking and everything, but ultimately it turned out that she was just calling to let them know that she took basically a baseball bat to it and took care of it. And yeah, she just went ahead and took care of it. And my guest is saying, so that was it. I said, that was it. Like
That's the
she
story.
just, yeah, she just called for that. And you know what? Sometimes that happens. I mean, I do, I get all types of different stories from people, just really quick. Another one, a dispatcher was saying that a lady had called in late at night. She was walking up the stairs to get into her apartment. And when she got up there, she noticed that there was a raccoon down by her. She says she screamed and the raccoon screamed. And the caller says, I didn't even know raccoons could do that. And she runs down the stairs. The raccoon runs down the stairs too, and then takes off. And they're like, what do you want us to do? Because they did it. So what should we do? And they said, well, just in case it's, I guess rabbit or something, just send somebody out to check the area. But there are things like that happens in 911 too, which the comic relief, the way I put it is, it seems like you take hard call after hard call after hard call, and then the dispatch gods or the dispatch universe, however you want to put it, rolls the dice and throws it and says, you know what? Here's this one for you. And you don't think about it at the time, but afterwards you realize, you know what? I needed that. I needed that to break up the craziness that's been going on.
Right. Mark, you've had a lot of funny ones involving all kinds of animals. Well, tell us just maybe one or something that.
Yeah, I'll give you just one or two. And like Ricardo said, it's not all doom and gloom. We do have some fun at work. And you have to, or it won't go well. But I can think of one. From my EMS career, we had a pretty bad trauma, a very bloody trauma, and not to get any more graphic than that. But this person had a down jacket on, and I was a very new medic with a very seasoned partner, and he's watching me do. So I take my scissors out because you have to expose your work area, which is the human body, and I start clipping the scissors, cutting off his down jacket, and before we know it, the back of the ambulance it's covered. I mean, covered in feathers. So but we kept working on this guy. We pull up to Mass General Hospital in Boston, and I'm wheeling this person out who's very, critically injured, and I'm covered in feathers. My patient's covered in feathers. My partner's covered in feathers, and we walk into the trauma room where 15 people are waiting for your report, and you give your report, covered in feathers. That was always what I kind of found amusing. And the gentleman did well, thankfully.
Oh gosh.
And then one other just funny one from the police side. One of our dispatchers. And sometimes we think to ourselves, why are they sending us to this? Sorry, Ricardo, but we do think that,
It
but it's
happens.
because they call the police. Who else are you going to call? So a local fast food restaurant called and said, there was a duck, a duck in their bathroom, which is, so I'm sent to this call. I'm like, this is a joke. This can't be, So I go into the local Burger King and go into the ladies' bathroom, and sure enough, there's a duck in the bathroom. And then you're like, well, what am I going to do with this duck? And finally we, grabbed the blanket and relocated the duck to its new home. So yes,
That's so funny.
you definitely have to break up
Oh yeah.
the calls with some
Mhm.
funny ones.
Oh, like sometimes on your Facebook, like if there's like dogs that are cats that are lost and they show up at the police department or they're dropped off, and then did you have your own dog one time show up in one of those
Oh
pictures?
yeah. So a lot of people will,
Oh,
again,
so
they don't
funny.
know what to do with the lost dog.
Yeah.
So well, let's bring it to the police
Yeah,
department.
yeah, yeah.
So every week we have a dog roaming. If it's a nice dog,
Yeah.
sure enough, my dog was wandering the neighborhood, and someone brought it to my office, and so it happened to us, and
Oh, the best.
yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, I'd love to. My favorite question is always asking the guests in closing, what do you reach when you need some hope?
So for myself, a lot of times I go to music, or lately a lot, and I wish, like, if I could go back in time to talk to myself at the beginning of my dispatch career, I would tell myself, get into breathing techniques and meditation and such a lot sooner, because whether you believe it or not, it's going to help. So for me, that has always brought me into a better place. Um, I didn't get a chance to mention this earlier, but I'll just say this really quick. Everything that I do now and the initiative that I have, it really started from when I was in dispatch in 2007. This was when everything started to change. The reason for that, though, is because when my grandmother passed away, I was the one who took that call.
Mm.
And it felt as though it was meant for me because I was on backup phones and radios, but my partner got up to go, and she asked if it was okay. And I said, of course, nothing is happening anyway, which is like tempting fate. And I end up taking this call. The hair in the back of my neck stands up, and I thought, this is going to be different. And I look up at the screen, and it's my mother's cell phone number, but it was my cousin who was calling. And she asked if it was me. I said yes. And she goes, Grandma just died. And I thought, what are the odds that I was going to be the one to take this? But I feel like it was definitely meant for me. And it was what started me trying to figure out what was wrong with me and how to help me. The more I started talking about it, the more other dispatchers started talking about it. And it just continued to build. The podcast came from my struggle. The I Am 911 movement came from my struggle. And I wanted to share those stories because dispatchers are not classified as police, fire, and EMS in the protective class through the Office of Management and Budget. We are under the clerical class. And so basically, we're considered not first responders or anything. We're clerical work. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I say that right off the bat, but we're seen as clerical workers. And so my initiative, it started as a way to raise awareness for reclassification, but quickly turned into peer support. So Nicole's story is just one part of all the stories that I've shared along with my own. And when I reach for hope, I reach for the power of storytelling because there's a lot of power in that storytelling and people don't understand that. But and maybe it is that they just don't realize it right away. But when you hear a story and it moves you,
Yeah.
you're doing something right there. So for
Absolutely.
me, reaching for that hope is music, the meditation, the breathing, but also that power in storytelling. Because it's
Absolutely.
something that I love, and it's really pushed my initiative and everything that I do to date.
Right. Mark? Yeah.
So mine, I have a few. Obviously, obviously for me, first and foremost would be my Christian faith, my hope. Hope is in Jesus, and that gives all other things pale in comparison. So I know I have hope not only here but in the future as well. So absolutely that, and then my marriage to my wife Bex, Rebecca. She's kind of the rock. I kind of hit the lottery with her. When I even, she was my first, stress debriefment counselor without me even knowing it, because I don't open up to many people. But, I'd come home and say, something very, I wouldn't get into specifics, but just kind of say something just to get it off my chest. And then she was always a good listener and can never really understand how I cope with these things, but that definitely she's definitely a huge part of that and a big reason that I have hope in this life, in this world, and absolutely our kids, family, and friends, of course. And I don't spend a lot of off-duty time with friends from work, but we have a really close group of friends that are not related to my work that are just wonderful.
That's wonderful. I'm going to put, we could have talked for like 2 hours today. I'm going to put a lot of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about and the things we did speak about in the show notes. So I encourage all of our listeners and viewers to check out some of those links. You won't regret it. Ricardo, Mark, thank you so much for your time today, sharing the stories, and most importantly, like creating and maintaining these initiatives. We need to do this for your colleagues, for people like Nicole, and just keep those stories going. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.